Welcome to Unscripted Pivots, the podcast where we explore life's unexpected turns and the incredible journeys they can lead us on. Today, we're diving into a deep topic that often requires one of the most profound pivots of all. Today, we're going to talk about addiction. My guest today is an expert in personal development and trauma recovery, and she is here to uncover the unscripted stories of those who have triumphed over addiction and reshaped their lives. It is both an honor and a privilege to welcome Quincy Whorf. Quincy is founder of Quincy Whorf Consulting and is a true luminary in the realm of personal development and empowerment. She has dedicated literally her life to helping other individuals not only overcome adversity, but thrive in its aftermath. As an internationally acclaimed speaker, workshop leader, and personal development coach, Quincy has inspired countless souls to rise above their challenges and unlock their full potential. Her wisdom and expertise extend across a wide range of crucial topics, making her a beacon of hope for those seeking transformation in their lives. Welcome, Quincy. I am truly excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm super excited to be here as well.
So I just love to talk about people who are seeking to become a better version of themselves. There's so much struggle out there. And I mean, the list goes so long. But when we talk about addiction and recovery, it's not just over one particular thing, right? Often our minds can go there. I want to talk to you about, like, how did you get into this? Like, I know it was early on. And I mean, did you come out of the womb knowing this was your life's work? Like, where was the
Absolutely not.
transformation? Okay, so let's chat about it.
Actually, I came out of the womb. I grew up in how do I want to say this? A Hollywood legacy family. My grandfather was an actor and a director and a writer and a producer in Hollywood, did lots of movies, did lots of
Wow.
stage. And my dad was, he designed album covers for some of the biggest bands in the world. And I just came from a super creative family. And I came out and fell in love with dance, and I was obsessed with being a prima ballerina at a very early age, and put my whole life into it. I mean, I came out of the womb obsessive, right? Like it was easy for me to get addicted to dance from the very beginning, right? So that was probably my first real addiction was dance, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. And it was the love of my life. Like it was the thing that I couldn't wait to do. My whole life was built around it. It was what I saw the whole trajectory of my life. And I believed that that's what I was meant to do. I was born into this family. They're all creative. This is my contribution. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I definitely see some genetic predisposition to being like an entertainer of sorts. That's pretty
Yes,
fascinating. And then you are a native California girl.
I am. There's not a lot of us left, but I am born and raised in
I
California.
know. I don't claim to be. I wish I was, but no, I don't. I like the East Coast. So you're
Yeah.
doing the dance and you're growing up. And then, I mean, was this something that you pursued into like higher levels of education? Were you dancing when you were in high school and college?
I was dancing in high school, but what happened for me is probably my first pivot was my father, who was an alcoholic, started to get sick from his alcoholism. And that changed my entire life. Like all of a sudden, the focus went from us being this, normal family, happy-go-lucky family. So I thought that was having this wonderful life to, oh my God, we have to get dad sober. And my mom's became myopically focused on my father and getting him sober. And all of a sudden, like the three of us didn't really register anymore. And as a result, I was angry, I was confused, I was toxically insecure before this. I had all these feelings and all these things going on that I didn't understand, and I actually found alcohol, and it changed my life, and it changed how I wanted to pursue my life. All of a sudden, dance was not nearly as interesting or as exciting as it once was. This whole new life that I was getting into about drinking and I had older friends and they would all go to the dance clubs in Los Angeles. And at the time, there was a lot of under 21 dance clubs, or there were 21 and over dance clubs that were super easy to get into. And
How old
so
were
I would
you?
have
Wait, I want to
friends.
pause for a minute. Yeah, wait, Quincy, not to interrupt you. I
Um,
apologize. How old were you? Just so we can get a feel, because you're obviously underage. You're getting into these clubs. Are
mhm.
you 15? Are you 17? How old are you?
Probably 14. It
Okay.
probably started when I was 14.
So, I mean,
Um,
what a pivotal time it is in a young woman's life at
mhm.
14. I mean, that is such a
Yeah,
transformative time. Even if your world hadn't been turned upside down, the
100%.
awakening of your own spirit and identity, even outside your family, starts to come into play at about age 14. And there's a lot of like, life changes that happen that, we enter womanhood. So these
Yes.
things are going on organically because, the calendar is going to say it's time for her to become a woman and find her own way. And you
Mhm.
have nothing around you that looks familiar, okay, or safe.
Yes,
So
correct.
all the things that your energy was directed towards, which was like the creative side and the dancing side, and I'm sure that you were probably a pretty decent student until you discovered that you didn't want to feel what you were feeling.
Anymore. Yeah, and I didn't know how
Yeah.
to change how I felt. My parents were in their own whirlwind at the time. They didn't know how to
Hmm.
change how they felt either. And it's interesting because alcoholism has a lot of controversy topics to it, whether it's
Hmm.
genetic, whether it's behavioral, whether it's learned, whether it's this, that, and the other. And growing up in an alcoholic family didn't made it easy for me to go to that as a solution because it was what I saw in my house for sure. And I don't know if they would have taught me how to deal with my feelings any differently than I did if I would have
Yeah.
avoided being an alcoholic, right? But I didn't grow up in a family that talked about how you felt. You weren't allowed to have feelings. They were extremely sarcastic and very witty. They were super educated,
Hmm.
and so not knowing how to deal with these feelings, my only solution at that point was, well, I don't want to feel at all. Let's just go there. I'd like to feel
Let me,
nothing,
yeah, I
and that
mean,
would be
understandably
preferable.
so. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
but let's get some color on your life. Were you one of a bunch of children? Are you an only child, or who at your
I'm
level is
the
also witnessing this?
I'm the oldest of three children. My sister is
Okay.
15 months younger than me, and then my brother was 5.5 years younger than me. So this happened when he was really young, and it's not something that he remembers a lot of. And it's interesting because my sister and I talk about it every once in a while, and we have very different views on how things happened. Um,
Why
of
is it
course,
that
as every
way?
all I don't know, but as all children do, right? But it's interesting because I always saw myself as my
uh,
dad's kid, right? Because he was the
mhm,
love of my life and the person I wanted to spend all my time with and who I just idolized and was obsessed with. And my sister and my brother were closer to my mom as kids.
mhm,
And when this all started to happen for him, all of a sudden I wasn't the focus in his life anymore. I wasn't the focus in anybody's life. And not knowing how to adapt to that was
mhm.
was traumatic for me in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And created this need of needing to be recognized from that point forward. So it was it was just an interesting kind of dynamic in our house,
It really,
and all of a
honestly, the
sudden things
perfect
just
storm.
changed.
Yeah, I mean, your brother
Totally.
too young to really understand and acknowledge, but you definitely old enough to witness that you were, to some degree being alienated, right? And whenever we
Yes.
have those gaps or the disconnection with anybody, that's
Hmm.
where these things, this need for comfort and self-soothing
Yes.
come into play. And it's so easy to
Yes.
slip into using outside substances, especially at that age where people are typically getting involved or introduced to those things, even if it's just in a recreational manner. But for somebody who has
Correct.
the addictive tendencies, this can lead to a very dark, serious path very quickly because physiologically they're wired different. I want to know a little bit
Hmm.
about your dad, so I can understand why you would go down a path he was just working hard to recover from. So, how interesting is that? Okay. What catapulted you into becoming sick? He is simultaneously trying to get well. Was he successful his
No.
in getting sober? No. Did it ever
Mm-mm.
last? Just quickly tell us about that so that I can
So,
understand what it was that you thought would work or not work.
well, it's interesting. I can remember the day I came home from school to find out that my father had a grand mal seizure, and I had gone to a
Wow.
girlfriend's house, and I called to check in, and
Mhm.
I called my mom, and I said, yeah, I'm at so and so's house, and she said, okay. I said, what's going on or whatever, and she said, well, your dad's in the hospital, and I said,
Wow.
okay, what happened? And, she started whispering in her own house when nobody else was there. She said, he has alcoholism. And I'm like,
Mm.
why is she whispering? That's so weird. But at that time, it was 1981, right? And in 1981, it was super not cool to be an alcoholic, especially in the music industry. I mean, today I always joke, you can go into rehab and come out with a record deal these days in
Yeah.
the music industry. But back in those days,
Right?
you were
Yeah.
blackballed. And
Mhm.
it was a really rough time, and that one little word changed my whole life, but at the time I didn't know what that really meant.
Mhm.
And I actually ended up chasing him in and out of rehab. He went to St. John's, he went to a couple different places, and my dad was, he was, I mean, he'd been an alcoholic for a really long time at that point. He was in
Mhm.
his early, I would say his early 50s, right, when this all started to happen. And he didn't really believe that alcohol was the problem. He was convinced that my mother was the problem, right? As any good alcoholic is,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
right?
any problem, whether it's alcoholism or any other kind of problem, we're also, we're too quick to look at like our outside circumstances, which include people, places, and things, and, point the finger instead of looking within.
100%.
So, okay. So the reason I asked you about your dad's journey was because I wanted to understand as you picked up the bottle while he was trying to put it down, if you were at least encouraged or started to hide, but it was just a bit of a hot mess, it seems. And so you were
Yeah,
doing your
it
own
wasn't
thing.
like,
And
yeah,
so, yeah,
yeah, it wasn't like anybody said, okay, this is what alcoholism is. This is, it has to do with that. We didn't talk about that stuff back then. Like, they didn't talk about drug
yeah,
addiction. They didn't talk about suicide that often. They didn't talk about, I mean, I don't remember once being in school and them talking about, teenage drinking or teenage drug use. I don't remember any
no.
of that. Like, I don't think any
No,
of that happened back
maybe you
then.
were going to get your hand slapped because, you did something around that or snuck it into school, but there was never the larger conversation as to how transformative it can be once it's abused. So today it's on the
Correct.
forefront, I think, because, you know, there's we can go into shame and denial and all the things that are surrounded with recovery and any kind of addiction, but let's just get there for a minute. So you're in the clubs, right, and you're hanging out with some kids that are older than you, you're sowing your oats. And so what did that look like? How well was that going until it didn't, because this leads you into your life's work. So
It's interesting because like I started hanging out in the clubs like I was living a double life. Like I would come home and act from school and act like I was normal, do my homework, eat dinner with my family and then go to bed super early and
mhm.
wait for my family to go to bed, and then I would slip out my window and take a cab from Encino to Hollywood or Encino to Santa Monica, or Encino to wherever to go dancing, at 13 and 14 years old, and hang out all
It-
night with my friends and dance and
uh,
drink and make out with boys and you know what I mean, do all that stuff.
every
And
parent's
I thought I had
nightmare.
arrived. Every parent's nightmare. And but I was a dancer, so for me it was like this was a way I got to do both at the same time,
Okay,
and
fair.
and it was just so much, and it was so much fun. I was having the time of my life, but it got pretty ugly pretty quick because I mean I joke about this all the time. I say, there's no such thing as social drinking at 13. Like that's not a
Mhm.
thing.
No.
Right? Like that's not a thing. Like we're drinking for
Yeah,
the effect from the
yeah,
get, and I was the kind of person who loved, the more you drink, the more the effect, right? And I
yeah.
loved that about alcohol and drugs.
So
So
how
it
old
turned
were
into a
you,
mess.
and what started to happen, and how old were you when you thought, okay, I'm going to address this, or did somebody else bring it to your attention?
Well, because my dad was trying to get sober, he was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. My mother was introduced
Hmm.
to Al-Anon. And when the Al-Anons got a hold of her, they said, we have a program for kids as well to learn about alcoholism. And I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous and through Alateen. And which was an amazing thing because, it was the only place it was being talked about. It was the only place I was going to learn anything. And I remember I didn't want anything to do with it, but I ended up going because there were hot boys there. But we would
Mm-hmm.
sit and we would talk about what it meant to live in an alcoholic home. And it was the only support I was getting at the time. But because I had been around the rooms and I had heard stories about what people were going through or the consequences that happened in their life as a direct result of their alcoholism, I started to relate because some of the consequences that were happening for me, I was hearing in older people. And so I knew that I had a problem with something, but I didn't necessarily understand the full ramifications of it. I thought that if I, could just get rid of the drugs and the alcohol, like it would be that simple, that everything would be fine. And
Yeah,
that wasn't
that's
the
a
case.
common,
Like,
yeah,
that's a
misconception
common
that's that
belief.
people think this all day long until they're brought to their knees. And it's not uncommon that people come in through like the back door instead of the front door. You know, they're there to work on or learn about somebody else's issue, typically a loved one, whether it be a parent or a husband or, whatnot. And then they see that they too have the same characteristics because, there
Yes.
is a thing such a thing as being able to thrive in other areas of your life and still have this disease have a hold on you. And
Mm-hmm.
it is so difficult to accept unless you've lost a series of things and you have concrete evidence that, you are in a place of like no return, really. Right. So,
Right. Right. Yeah.
move forward or go under. And okay, so you're learning more about the disease of alcoholism and you started to identify with it. And so with that, you just began to turn your life around? I mean, is that kind of what
Yeah,
happened? And
sort of. Yeah, there were a couple of super humiliating situations. I started waking up in strange places with strange people at 15 years old,
mhm.
naked almost always. And that was never, at 15, that's a scary thing. And usually I'd wake up at somebody's house, but I was sexually assaulted a bunch of times, and
I'm
believed on
sorry.
some level that, yeah,
Mm.
but believed on some level I deserved it because I was drunk and, you know, I wasn't able to defend myself. So it was, I just thought it was kind of par for the game, you know, and
You
uh,
know,
and
I,
so that
I
was hard, and that was hard.
I want to take a minute because, there can be listeners out here that can be somewhat shocked by the statement that you were 15 and these things were happening, and maybe they don't personally identify because they've never experienced it. But I challenge anybody who would be shocked by that statement to think if they have not done the same thing, maybe in their 20s while they were in college, their 30s, their 40s amidst divorce, coworkers, this and that. I can think of a slew of times where people have
Hmm.
done the same thing. Maybe you weren't 15, but I want you to dig deep and say, how many times did you find yourself in a place that you had no intention of being in as a result of abusing drinking? And it doesn't mean that you have to have the actual disease of alcoholism, but I witness this all too often. I am in a commercial real estate job, and I am surrounded by the cocktails
Hmm.
and, the parties and alcohol itself. Just that really is like the selling factor of every event. I don't know how many sober events or,
Anywhere,
non-drinking events are
anywhere you
actually,
go.
yeah, it's just, yeah, and I witness it on the regular,
Hmm.
and it's kind of sad because it's embarrassing. We're not saying that drinking is not fun. Yeah, it can be really fun, and for a quote unquote normal drinker, somebody who doesn't have an issue, there's nothing wrong with that. But I see, and this
Right.
this unscripted pivots is basically addressing a female audience, and I see so many women, and I feel their pain in like how they're using it as a coping mechanism, whether it's because the
Hmm.
kids are young and they are just so stressed out, or they're trying to balance, the job and the career, or deal with the husband, or deal with the divorce, or God forbid, deal with the cancer diagnosis. And so we do this to comfort ourselves and self-soothe. And that's considered, pretty normal, right? And okay. But it's amazing to me how nobody wants to look at when use becomes abuse and abuse slides into addiction. And
Hmm.
alcoholism is a progressive disease. So I also witness so many people struggling with, well, I used to be able to just have a couple glasses of wine. I used to be able to go out and then go home and go to sleep. And I can't do that. And then struggle and strive to return to the place where they used to. And then in comes
Yeah.
the blame of, well, I'm just older. Oh, it's hormones. No, I encourage anybody listening that if you think that you might have a problem, do a deeper dive into it, because it's nothing that anybody can run from, and it will eventually kick your hiney. Okay, I can say ass on here.
Yeah,
It will
for sure.
kick your ass. So you end up getting well, and then let's catapult into how you then became a personal development coach around this. You are out there supporting, just trauma, all right? So it's not even just
Hmm.
about addiction, but trauma, adults,
Hmm.
teenagers, and in your
Hmm.
life's work, you are out there helping and changing and transforming. I mean, Quincy, hail to the queen. I mean, that is big,
Thank you.
beautiful work and not
Hmm.
easy, because a lot of
No.
times I imagine you're encountering a lot of brokenness. And when we start with that, not so easy. It's not like you're talking to the eager entrepreneur with their hand up in the, first row. Oh, help me, teach me about this new strategy. Oh, I want to know. Oh,
No.
with the notepad, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of despair. So your clients are coming to you as a major
Hmm.
project. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit
Well,
about
and
that.
yeah, I mean, the love of my work is working with teenagers because I
Hmm.
believe that they're the most unheard, right, in a lot of ways,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
they need to be heard the most. That was my experience anyway. If I would have had somewhere to go, and I was lucky, like I got to go to Alateen and be a little heard, but that's not a formal environment. That's not a
Hmm.
um, it wasn't the kind of environment I'm talking about. But I love working with the teenagers because I relate to them the most in a lot of ways. Like I was there. I've been one of them. I've been recovering from being one of them my whole life, right? And so,
Yeah.
you know, over the years, like so the first time I got sober, I was 15 and a half, but I didn't stay sober. I went back out and it got worse as it does, and I got sober again at 18 years old. And so I've been sober since the beginning of time, and I've done so much work on myself because of all of my unscripted pivots, right? Things that I didn't
Sure.
plan for, whether it was, career changes or husband changes or, children. I'm not somebody who likes to feel pain, so I will do whatever it takes to recover from whatever pain's coming to me. And as a result of
Sure.
doing that work, I've attracted a lot of people to me who want to do the work as well. And I developed this skill over the years over how to help people see their own trauma. And this is where I get a little controversial in the sense that my vision about trauma is I don't believe any of us are broken. Like I hate hearing when people say, "Oh, I was so broken." I don't
Okay.
know that we're
Yeah.
broken as much. It's just a word that is so negative to me as much as it is I have so many different things that are going to form me into the person I'm meant to be. Like I think in this country especially we have a way of looking at trauma as a super negative thing. And there are, yes, trauma is gnarly and it changes you. I mean, the definition of trauma is, it's an event that happens that psychologically changes you through pain, right? But
Mm.
that can good thing as well. I mean, think about it. Like if, you win the lottery and you just, you know what I mean? You just won the $2 billion lottery
I hope
and
I
you
get
haven't been able
traumatized in
to,
that way. That would be lovely. Yeah. It's,
but
this reminds me.
it does change your whole life. It changes who you are as a person. It changes the way you see things. It changes who comes into your life, who leaves you, because
Mhm.
it's a major shift that happens, whether it's a good one or a bad one. We get to decide what we get to do with it,
True.
right?
True.
And so you know,
mm. This reminds me of a quote when I was, thinking about speaking to you. And it goes, your present circumstances don't determine where you can go. They merely
no.
determine where you start. And
And that's
so,
what trauma is too. Like I
yes,
believe
right.
that we are all born perfect, and that
Hmm.
that the number one thing that humans are supposed to do on this planet is connect to other humans. And we are given a mission when we get here, and that mission shows up in the form of trauma. Because in that
Hmm.
trauma, that leads us on a path to connect to the people we're supposed to connect to. I mean, if we're born
Sure.
perfect and we have nothing that changes us, then what do we need each other for? Right? And I've been led as a result of the trauma in my life to deal with and help the people in my that have come to me I mean, I would never try to help somebody with, oh, I don't even know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but like, accounting, like, I don't
Okay.
have
Yeah. You're not
accounting.
going to
I
do the
don't have
numbers.
account of trauma, but I have other traumas. And so those are the kinds of things that people come and say, help me with this. And there's a gift
Hmm.
in all of it. There's a gift. It makes us a different person. It changes us, and it gives us something that we couldn't have gotten in another way. And I think that changing the way that people look at trauma, or why trauma shows up in our life, is
Yeah.
is important to get people to want to work with it, right? Because people hear trauma and it's terrifying. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with all that pain. But what if
Well,
that
no,
pain?
because the word itself just encapsulates the
Oh,
idea that you're going to be uncomfortable.
hmm,
So yeah, maybe maybe there's got to be a new word for that too. I'm not sure.
yeah. But
But
what
pain
if under
is,
all that
yeah.
trauma is the most beautiful sculpture ever? Like, that's what trauma is to me. Trauma is the knife that peels away, the things in you that you don't need, and
Hmm.
forms them into something bigger and better if you want them to. I mean, you can hide behind trauma and use it as an excuse for your entire life if you want to, and a lot of people do. But
Yeah.
where's that getting anybody,
Well, yeah, and that reminds me of the other quote that, recovery is not for people who need it, it is for people who want it. Right.
Yes.
And you're gonna have to want what is essentially the unknown future. We can
Yeah.
all be told that, like, this is what waits, on the other side. You're talking about what's underneath and the beautiful sculpture that exists. But it's not something that we historically have any experience with personally, right? Like to face those things. And then to get the
Hmm.
support around it. There's so much out there about, stigma and denial. I celebrate that a lot of, mental health awareness and support has really
Hmm.
grown over the last several years, and it continues to be in
Yes.
the forefront. And I can't help but to think that one of the catalysts to that is like women, mothers in particular, coming out of the darkness of, I don't want to hide behind this anymore. I have a child who I think may die from this. I have a husband who, to everybody
Hmm.
else's experience, big CEO sitting in the C-suite, and he's so famous and he's so rich and blah blah blah, and you have no idea what we're living with behind the home door, right? There's so much
Hmm.
of that, and so I think that women generally have been a catalyst to making sure that we're checking in. Right. It's that nurturing kind of thing.
100%.
Yeah, and so, yay, go
Yeah.
females, right? I swear we
Yeah.
are
I
the
mean,
leaders
women.
in real change. Yeah.
Yeah, women have been, have, yes, stopped being quiet about stuff and have started to
Mhm.
normalize conversations that
Yeah.
were, not topics that were talked about in the 50s, in the 60s, in the
Yeah.
70s, even in the 80s.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you could just talk about postpartum depression. Like, that was never talked about.
Yeah, all the
And
things that we never talked about,
everything.
that are now,
Yeah,
and that's why, normalizing that things are, yeah, normalizing that the word normal isn't correct. Okay, this has to be, everything
no,
has to be redefined. I mean, it's terrific that today, we can have a sexual orientation that we don't have to hide. I'm not saying that everybody can be as public about their choices, but it's pretty mainstream. Who gets
oh
shocked now
yeah,
when you learn that? I mean, there's like nothing about that. So, and
no,
that's
not
great,
at
but
all.
that wasn't what it was 20 or 30 years ago. And postpartum depression, like, how could you not be happy? You were just gifted a baby. You're blessed, right? We have to
Right.
talk
Yeah.
about and we have, what I love to even just discuss about this, any kind of obsession. I know people, women who I used to envy because I'm like, look at their fabulous bodies. Well, guess what? You know what? They haven't exercised a addiction or they have an
Mm-hmm.
eating disorder. Not everybody. I'm just saying I have come to learn because I don't have those things. I always wanted an exercise addiction. I don't have it.
Oh, I'd
And
pay
I
for
used to
one
go,
actually.
oh, yeah, I go, look at them. And then you find out that there is so much more underneath and it's really destructive behavior that they are in pain about.
Yes,
Sure, they're a
yes.
size 0, but they're deeply unhappy. So what
Mm-hmm.
I like to bring to the forefront in this conversation, and the reason I even wanted to do this episode was I wanted to say, let's stop being embarrassed. Let's start looking in and educating ourselves. I wanted this to be a launching place where it might encourage
Mm-hmm.
somebody to do a deeper dive into becoming educated about what this looks like, what
Right.
addictive
And
behavior can be.
yeah.
You know,
Well, and what
I,
pain can be. I mean, part of my mission is, I go and I speak in high schools to kids because I want them to normalize how they feel and how they think. I mean,
mm-hmm,
I thought that I was the only one who was toxically insecure. I thought I was the only one who was obsessed with how people thought of me. I thought I was the only one who had all these feelings and all these thoughts, but I wasn't. And
sure.
it wasn't until years later that I found out. And it's like if these kids could learn how to talk about that stuff, they can learn how to deal with it differently. Then they don't have to go to drugs and alcohol to make themselves feel better. But we're still not dealing with the problem in schools. We're still dealing with, the defective solution, which is going to drugs and alcohol. And they're just trying to scare kids to death. And it's scary, but let's deal with the
Mm-hmm.
real problem. And, pain is just the beginning of the journey, right? If I'm having pain about something, it means I have something I need to look at in me. That's all that
Yeah.
pain is. And if I would have been given that simple of a definition when I was a kid, I don't know what I would have done with it, but it would have started a conversation. It would have given me a way to look at things in a
Mm-hmm.
different way than what I was doing.
Well, I
And
love
and
I love
that's
that
what
you're
I want to
doing that,
normalize.
with the teenagers because, if we're only looking at the behavior and not the actual
Hmm.
problem, we're missing the point. We're missing the
Yes,
point
and the
because
problem will never go away. Yeah.
no, that's right. And I mean maybe for some, but for a lot of people it won't. And just to have that larger conversation around that. What is
Yeah.
the most joyful thing that you experience in your work? Like what is the most rewarding part of all of this?
Watching somebody have a serious shift, right?
Mm,
About something where they've been so trapped by a belief system or by an event or, seeing it one way and they can't see it any other way. And then over time, doing the work with them and getting them to a different place where their perception changes and all of a sudden they're
yeah.
free of it, never to return to it again, right? And I think that that's probably the biggest joy part of it. Yeah, sure, I love when I speak and somebody comes up to me and says, oh my god, I heard I heard everything I needed to hear, which is always good too because it means I'm on the right track, right? But I think
Yes.
that on the one-to-one basis, watching somebody literally get free of the ties that are binding them is magical. Gives me goosebumps talking about it. So.
That must be so rewarding. I can feel it.
Hmm.
I can feel the validation and the love that comes from that. And then let me ask
Hmm.
you on the flip side, not to burst this bubble, but what is it like when you've worked with a client for some time and they're unable to, or they choose not to get past their trauma?
There's a lot of those people, and it is
Yeah.
frustrating. But I know from my own work that we're kind of people's brains and their belief systems and everything that's going on in here is kind of
Hmm.
like a lock that has 1,000 clicks in it, right? And
Okay.
every time somebody has a conversation or learns something different or sees something that affects them, one of those clicks gets clicked. And so I have to remember that when I'm talking to somebody, I'm not responsible for what they get out of it. I'm just responsible for presenting the information and hoping that they hear it, right? But what they do with it, I have no idea. I mean, I think about all the people that came into my life that would say things to me or would help me with things, and it wasn't until years and years and years later
Hmm.
that I finally got totally opened up on it. But it took a series of clicks to get there that don't happen all at one moment. And so I think that even fighting letting go of trauma or wanting to hold on to it, it's a protection, right? It's how that person's usually protecting themselves. And eventually it stops working. and
Yeah.
it's no different than alcoholism or food addiction, or even an exercise addiction, right? I knew somebody who
Yeah.
was addicted to drinking water at one point. Eventually it stops working,
It
and
stops
they get
working.
into enough pain.
Well, we used to, I mean, I know people, and I'm not saying I probably went through a phase like this for a little bit, work addiction, and we used to
Hmm.
be, used to hear, oh, addicted to work or whatever, or workaholic. Oh, oh, so and so can't be around on Friday. They're workaholic. And out come the hands. We're going to clap their dedication and their service. And the true matter
Hmm.
is, okay, again, not everybody that, works hard is a workaholic, but people slip into these obsessions. And I think that the message today too is that when you want to take a hard look at how you're prioritizing things, and if there is this one thing that you almost feel like you can't stop, or you begin renegotiating with yourself the boundaries that you put into place. So for instance, you say, well, I'm going to put the family first, or I'm going to go to my son's basketball game, or whatever it is, and then you don't look at what's coming between you and the thing that you wanted to do, that you had promised you would do. Because when we keep pushing that envelope further and further, and we start to renegotiate with ourselves, that kind of behavior leads to, lowering your self-esteem, self-disgust, really. And then you start to isolate because you don't even want to admit it. You don't want to admit it to
Hmm.
somebody else. You don't want to admit it to yourself. And that's where Quincy comes in, because she's able to take, an experienced deep dive into how you can transform, how you can recover, and, do it in a loving, safe manner. So this is, I love that you're doing this kind of work. I feel,
Thank you.
oh my gosh, I sell title insurance for a living. Like, I'm like, wah, wah, wah. No, not that. Look, I love commercial real estate, but I mean, Quincy, you are changing lives. I mean, I am, there's a role for title insurance, and
Right.
it's an important one. But what you're doing is just so fascinating and so incredible. So let me end
Mm.
with this. I have one last question for you. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's considering going into this line of work? Like, what would you tell them if they wanted to do this? What's the skinny?
What would I tell them? I would tell them to honor what their path has taught them, and
Mm,
and propel themselves from that point, because I think that what makes us the strongest in being able to deliver a message to somebody and being able to help somebody is being able to identify with them. And I think that that's probably one of the problems the therapeutic community has had for a really long time, which is there's a lot of people who go and get degrees and who end up treating people that they have no relation of, they
yeah,
can't relate to them in any way, but they're giving them suggestions, or they're having conversations with them that are not landing the way that they probably should, because they don't have that kind of experience. And I
mm-hmm.
think that what gives me the unique advantage in a lot of ways is because I have so much experience and because I've done so much work. There's a lot of things I can talk about that I have personal experience with, so I can put myself in that person's shoes. Like, I have to remember that, on every second I talk to somebody, is if I was in this person's shoes, what would I be thinking, and how would I want to hear what I need to say to this person? And that's
That
that's
that's
that's where true empathy comes from, you know.
that's awesome. I mean, they say too that the best person that you can help is the person you used to be. And
Mhm.
in any area. And so that
Yes.
is great. I thank you so much for coming
thank
on and
thank you for
speaking
having me.
to our listeners out there. And I think this is such an important conversation. And just so everybody knows too, I've never met Quincy in person. Somebody else was talking about how fantastic she is, and so we were relative strangers until this thing. And now guess what, we're going to be good friends, because I'm going to hunt her down. Anyway, I just love you,
For sure.
Quincy. You're such a rock
Thank
star,
you so
and
much.
hope to see you soon. All right, bye.
Thank you.